Shrouded in mist and isolated in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, 350 miles off the South American coast of Costa Rica, lies a deserted island called Cocos.
Cocos is hidden away, and for that reason, it was more a myth. Some weren't sure that it existed.
In the 18th and early 19th century, ruthless pirates paid regular visits to Cocos.
There are so many accounts of how pirates buried treasures on this island.
Some say that millions of dollars of gold and precious stones still lie hidden under its coconut trees, rocks, and caves.
If someone was talking about Treasure Island on those days, always was Cocos.
Over the years, hundreds of men have battled against the island's incessant rain, the searing heat, and unyielding soil to search for the treasure. Some stayed for months, most left within days. But one man spent 17 years on the island looking for it. His name was August Gissler.
There was no turning back, as long as there was blood in his veins and breath in his lungs.
To some treasure hunters, his was a magnificent passion, but to others, it's a tale of greed and obsession. This is the story of August Gissler's amazing quest to find the pirate treasure on Cocos Island. (1881). A British sailing ship was en route to Hawaii's capital city, Honolulu. On board was a 23-year-old German engineer named August Gissler.
He's the son of a knife manufacturer, I think the third of 11 children. One can imagine that that's potentially a stifling place to be. He was expected to follow his elder brother into the knife manufacturing business and, in the family firm, and instead Gissler put to sea.
Gissler's voyages took him all over the world, and along the way, he met some unusual companions. Gissler befriended a young Portuguese traveler, Manuel Cabral, and they fell deep into conversation.
We were sitting a lot of time together with this young man. They're drinking a lot of rum, and they were telling a lot about families and things.
Over the weeks that they were at sea together, they grew to trust each other and appreciate each other's company.
One evening, a sailor by the name of Old Jack walked by. And Cabral said that he looked like a pirate. Gissler told him those days were over and asked why he mentioned the word pirate. Cabral answered, "Old Jack fits the description of my grandfather's life. He was a sailor and sailed this very ocean."
Cabral mentioned that the reason he was so far from home was that he was hoping one day to reach an island where there was something very special hidden. And he produced from an oilskin folder an account written by his grandfather of his life.
The diary was the autobiography of a pirate in the early 1800s. Cabral's grandfather wrote of how, when he was a young fisherman, he and his boat were blown off course with a broken mast and picked up by a pirate ship.
They were pressed into service and found themselves working for one of the greatest and most notorious and most charismatic pirates of the day, which was Don Pedro Benito, Bloody Sword Bonito.
That was the moment when Gissler was hooked by the story. He must have been really fascinated by this diary of a real pirate.
It was a tale of buccaneers, Spanish galleons, and murder on the Pacific. Piracy was a lucrative industry in the early 19th century, and bloody sword Benito ruled the waves.
They would sometimes attack villages on the shore, sometimes they would attack a Spanish galleon. One very famous occasion, they took some priests along with their treasure on board.
One section of the diary made Gissler's heart race. It told of a time when the pirates had just stormed a Spanish galleon loaded with treasure. And they were now looking for somewhere to bury it all.
You can't put in at port with a whole load of jewels without raising some notice. People are going to wonder, where did it come from?
You've got to put the stuff somewhere safe.
You can sell tobacco in any old port and it'll move quickly, but you know, you have a golden chalice. It's a little bit harder to work with.
One particular passage really drew Gissler in. Cabral's grandfather described where they were going to bury the treasure.
A few days after our capture, the lookout reported an island ahead. From far off, we could see a huge waterfall and high mountains on each side. Three boats landed the treasure on a shore near a coconut grove. There was a stream running close into the sea.
Gissler read how Cabral's grandfather and the captain followed the stream for half a mile inland and came across another coconut grove where they decided to conceal their plunder.
Now, there were no numbered Swiss bank accounts in those days, so it had to be put safely in a hiding place that had to have two distinct qualities. One, it must be very difficult to find. And two, it must be possible for you to locate it because you have certain information which no one else has got access to.
Gissler now read what seemed to reveal the exact location of where Cabral's grandfather buried the pirate treasure.
I dug a hole in the ground. The treasure was piled into the hole. The captain took exact bearings, but he did not tell me what they were. I took my own bearings from the mouth of the stream in line with the round rock, which is about 600 feet west by south from the mouth of the stream and about 20 feet back of the coconut grove.
The document was completely unique, and I think Gissler knew this right away. It gave detailed descriptions of what the treasure was and where the treasure was buried. Landmarks, for instance, numbers of paces from the spot where it would be buried.
You can understand how exciting it must have been for August Gissler when he's on board the ship. And it becomes more and more clear that what he is looking at is a pirate document with essentially directions to the treasure.
These were the most extraordinary pages Gissler had ever read. He now realized that not only did they give precise directions as to where the treasure was buried, they had never been published or shown to anyone else before. But there was something missing.
While Gissler had an awful lot of information about the whereabouts of this buried treasure, He lacked one crucial thing, and that was the name of the island itself.
"169 days after leaving London, Gissler's ship finally reached Hawaii's capital, Honolulu. By now, he's desperate to know the island's name and needs to raise enough money for an expedition to go and search for the treasure.
Gissler arrived in Hawaii and he immediately began looking for work. Took a while, but eventually ended up finding some on a plantation.
While Gissler worked on a banana farm, he had a chance encounter in a bar with a man named Bartels. Here, he heard of another link to the buried treasure. Bartels told him about his wife's father, a man named Old Mac.
Gissler was to learn that Old Mac had actually known the pirate Benito Bonito as well. He'd been involved in the capture of a Spanish galleon off the coast of Acapulco and had sailed to an island where the treasure was buried.
Gissler's ears pricked up. He wondered if this was the same island as the one in Cabral's grandfather's diary. Bartels handed Gissler Old Mac's chart and said that he had set off in 1852 to search for Benito's buried treasure on an island called Cocos, but had run out of money before he got there.
Old Mac was in the possession of what appeared to be pirate maps and instructions to the treasure on an island that he knew as Cocos Island.
But where was this mysterious island? The chart revealed an island with 2 mountains and 2 bays at the northeast and northwest ends. The island's position was latitude 527 degrees north and longitude 87 degrees west. Compass bearings from the 2 points were given where these 2 lines cross, and the treasure's hiding place was marked. And there were even more clues.
When Gissler examined these papers, to his excitement and interest, he discovered that the description of Cocos Island was almost exactly the same as the island that Cabral had told him about.
Critically, Cabral's grandfather's tale talked about 2 mountains. So did Old Mac's charts.
He has finally found out from the Bartels the name of the island, and it's Cocos.
Cocos is famous for buried treasure because there are so many accounts of how pirates buried vast hoards of gold, rubies, and silver on this island, and for various reasons couldn't come back to retrieve it. In many cases because they were hanged or lost at sea.
Gissler is now convinced that the treasure could still be there and is determined to find it. Gissler wrote how before he left, Bartels gave him one word of caution.
Don't take too many hands to the island, and don't let a living soul know what you're after. You might not only lose your treasure, but also your life.
Ignoring the warning, Gissler eventually managed to get a ride on a Swedish sailing ship, whose captain promised to drop him off on Cocos on their way to Chile. But very quickly, Bartel's words seemed to come into play. The ship was poorly manned, and the winds and sea were against them. First, they were hit by a storm. And then worse. They had no winds at all. Gissler described his journey.
We were only 350 miles from the island and thought we could easily make it in a week's sailing, but very light winds prevailed, and 14 days elapsed before we sighted Cocos. At that point, we were becalmed again, and that night we lost sight of the island completely.
The Swedish sailing ship drifted around the Pacific Ocean for another week, and then finally, the captain was forced to abandon the Cocos Island drop-off. They had no option but to carry on to Chile. 73 days after leaving Honolulu, and over 3,000 miles away from Cocos Island, they arrived in Chile, South America, with Gissler still on board. In Chile, the Swedish crew introduced him to a captain of a whaling company who told Gissler he had been to Cocos Island on several occasions.
Once, in 1875, he had fallen in with an American expedition looking for the treasure where they had been digging close to the beach. This interested me, as the plans I had in my possession pointed to the cache being a good way inland.
Over the next few months, Gissler talked to local merchants and dockside workers to gain funds for another trip to Cocos Island.
It takes him some time to get himself together and arrange his affairs, but he manages in Chile to really incorporate a group of investors who are willing to travel with him to Cocos Island.
In late February 1889, and 8 years after first hearing Cabral's grandfather's story, Gissler finally set foot on Cocos Island. Now at last, Gissler can pursue his dream.
Cocos Island lies 550 kilometers off the coast of Costa Rica. It's part of the same volcanic chain as the Galapagos, so it just juts up out of the Pacific deep. It comes from something like 4 kilometers below sea level. It's just the top of a mountain peak. So what you see above the water is just the beginning. It's a jungle with mist and waterfalls cascading off the side of these granite cliffs. And it's really alone out there in the Pacific Ocean.
No permanent human settlement has ever survived here. Now Gissler and his men were the only ones on the island. Over the next few weeks, as the expedition party made a base camp, Gissler got the lay of the land. Looking up at the two mountains dominating the island, he opened his chart to survey the land.
The two were marked on my chart. From these mountains, 2 lines were drawn which joined a good way inland, and a large square had been drawn round the point where the lines intersected. The writing on the plan was in Spanish, but the mate translated it for us as follows. In 1821, we buried treasure here of immense value. After we had buried the treasure, we planted a coconut tree on top and took bearings by compass, which showed locations northeast by east half east to the East Mountain and north 10 degrees east to the West Mountain.
Gissler used the chart as a marker and set the party to work.
They uprooted trees. They searched caves. And they dug fresh approaches to existing tunnels. But all to no avail. And one by one, the party who had come so enthusiastically with Gissler began to drift away from the island until only 4 of them remained.
Gissler and his last 3 companions continued their search. They dug under every palm tree around the square marked on the chart. But after 10 months, exhausted and disillusioned, they left the island in December 1889 and returned to Chile. The following October, Gissler was back on the island. This time, he had a better equipped and supplied treasure hunting party. And very soon, he seemed to be getting results. One morning, Gissler dug up some 18th century Spanish gold coins. But the few gold coins proved to be their only find.
The expedition spent several months on the island digging and boring until we were forced to admit that we had no sure signs that we would strike anything in the near future. We therefore hove up anchor.
Gissler was now tormented with self-doubt. Had he fallen for the oldest treasure hunter folly of them all?
Everybody begins with a treasure map or some secret information that they believe that they are the only people in possession of. And you think, this will take me a week and I'll dig something up and I'll be rich and that will be it.
He didn't find the places they were described, and he didn't find the exact positions. I mean, that's a volcanic area, and the shape of the island is changing a lot.
Gissler went to the island and found that by following the instructions that he had, he didn't find the treasure. And I believe that the realization suddenly dawned on him that following these specific instructions was not going to work.
That realization was an epiphany for August Gissler. Although his best endeavors to find the treasure had all been failures, he would have to try an entirely new approach.
After a number of unsuccessful attempts with one small expedition after another, Gissler realized that the problem was so immense, it was not going to be solved by one of these hit-and-run missions.
The key to any new approach, Gissler realized, was to expand the search area.
His plan was that he would go to the most likely place where the treasure was and start digging. And if that didn't work, he would increase his search area, increasingly larger and larger and larger.
The task of Gissler's proposal was immense. It would mean digging up the entire island and would take years. So the only way to do it, he believed, was to live on the island, and if necessary, devote his whole life to it.
I think it was clear to Gissler after his early attempts to search for the treasure that logistics were a major issue, and logistics are expensive. And financing it all himself could happen once, maybe twice, but I think the amount of effort and perhaps the extended nature of the search would necessitate a different kind of access.
To Gissler, the idea of spending long periods of time on the island made complete sense. Over the past 2 years, he had got to know the island's terrain and climate well. The soil, he believed, was rich and ready for cultivating, and there was an abundance of wild pigs, goats, and deer. He thought that if the land was farmed, it could easily be self-supporting for as long as he wanted it to be. Gissler then hit on the idea of forming an agricultural community to live on the island with him. Together, they would hunt for the treasure.
He wanted to colonize the island of Cocos. And he was claiming that he could grow all sorts of things on the island. He could grow the best tobacco. He could grow much more of it than they could per acre in Cuba. Lots of different varieties of bananas. Given that the island is mainly volcanic rock, and it's only got an area of about 5 miles by 2 miles, it was amazing how much Gissler was claiming.
He petitioned the president of Costa Rica to set up an agricultural colony that could be supplied by mailboat once a month, and provisions could be brought on. That would facilitate really a longer-term involvement with Cocos.
In July 1891, the Costa Rican president agreed to Gissler's plan and granted him certain rights to develop the island agriculturally.
He got permission from the Costa Rican authorities to set up a colony, and they agreed that if he could bring 50 families from Germany, they could live on it.
Gissler now had to raise the funds and to find 50 German families. With the colony rights in his pocket, he traveled around Europe, promoting his island scheme.
On those days, the German emperor was very interested to increase German colonies. So, and also this was a little bit the spirit of the days.
After Europe, Gissler then tried his luck in America. The New York Times would write of him, "Gissler is a breathing replica of Michelangelo's heroic statue of Moses. His reddish beard reaches to his waist. His hair is luxuriant on a splendidly poised head. His eyes are as clear and as searching as an eagle's. His nose is classic. His voice is profoundly mellow, fitting the man to perfection. His height is 6 feet 3 inches. He is built like a wedge, as a man should be, with massive shoulders. His hand is as big as the hand of Providence and so hard that his clenched fist is used as a spike maul. Nowhere were there any takers, not in Europe or America. Gissler was now desperate to get back to Cocos, but he was unable to raise the funds or the people to form a colony. He appealed again to the Costa Rican government to help him.
I explained to the president that it was impossible to raise any capital on the concession I had received in 1891, and he requested me to put down what I now desired, and he would see what he could do.
Gissler spelled out exactly the terms he would need to make the settlement work.
My demands were a gift of 1/2 of the island for myself, the other half to be laid out in sections for the settlers I proposed to bring. It took some time to win my point, but eventually the terms were granted.
This was the breakthrough Gissler had wanted. Now married to his wife Mary, Gissler again returned to Europe. This time, there were plenty of takers, and he was able to secure funds from his relatives and friends to transport the colonists over to the island.
My wife went with me to the island on the 13th of December 1894. From New York we brought lumber and building materials, provisions, and seeds. In Panama, we secured tropical plants, chickens, ducks, and turkeys.
The German farming families began to build houses, and it looked as if everything was going to be all right.
Cocos Island represented everything that Germany of the time wasn't. It was wild, untamed. It's completely raw. It's isolated. It didn't involve being one of 11 children in a family enterprise, making knives. It was him doing his thing.
The first thing we did was to clear the land to plant cane, bananas, vegetables, and coffee.
On November the 11th, 1897, Gissler was even appointed governor of Cocos Island by the government of Costa Rica.
You head so far down a path, that path becomes who you are. And I think he was really happy to be the governor of Cocos Island.
At last, Gissler had the time, the resources, and the people to look for the treasure. He made regular explorations along the shorelines, and one day, there seemed to be another breakthrough. He came across more Spanish gold coins.
He offered parts of the island to his family members. So he really thought that he was securing his family's legacy for generations.
But Gissler's dreams quickly began to evaporate. The government boat requested by Gissler to drop supplies off to the island failed to show up after only making a few trips.
As no more ships came in, it was not long before we ran short of provisions. One of the settlers fell ill, his limbs became swollen, and soon after he died.
Gissler's problems didn't end there. The German colonists, who were promised the land of plenty, were struggling to grow vegetables in the tropical paradise.
Cocos Island has rather unusual soil. It's a grey type of sand or grey type of clay which holds water a few feet down and makes it very difficult indeed to grow anything.
Gissler knew he had to get more provisions if he and the colonists were going to survive and locate the treasure. He built a boat and took 4 men across the water to Costa Rica with him to help with the supplies. When he got there was another setback. As their boat was loaded, 3 of the men refused to return with him.
There was no use in trying to reason with these men and telling them what a cowardly thing it was to leave their wives. To bring the settlers over had cost a lot of money, but I thought it would be cheaper in the long run to get rid of them.
But Gissler's problems didn't stop there. When he returned, he found that the situation on the island had deteriorated even more. A plague of rats was attacking the colonists' children.
The island is full of rats, and so it didn't really go well for the colonists. I think that they had a desire or a vision of themselves as wealthy plantation owners, you know, in the Pacific, not as subsistence farmers whose children were being attacked by vermin.
The colonists now rebelled at the island's harsh conditions.
Most of them didn't want to really work hard, and coming from Germany, they are not used to this climate. Wet, 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 and humid and hot. And then they had to build their house, they have to cook their food, and they have to do everything.
As the colonists turned on Gissler, he confronted them.
One of the things about Gissler was not only his mental and physical strength and stamina, but his natural ability to command.
He said that on this island he's the governor, the judge, jury, and the executioner.
I thought they would raise crops and get rich, but in a short time they raised an insurrection instead. I declared martial law as governor of the island, and with my big pistols pointed in the faces of the Germans, I scared them into submission. They laid down what arms they had, and peace was restored.
Yet another problem hit Gissler's plans. His provisions quickly ran out, and he had to go back to the mainland for more. While Gissler was away, the island received some unexpected and unwelcome visitors. A British warship dropped anchor in Cocos Bay. Under the command of an Admiral Palliser, several platoons were dispatched ashore with shovels, picks, and a large quantity of dynamite. For the next few days, they proceeded to dig and blast huge holes all over the island, hoping to find the treasure. As Gissler's wife Mary tried to stop them, she was told to mind her own business. Yet despite all the craters they made, the British didn't find any treasure. When Gissler returned with new supplies, he complained about the incident.
In fairness to the Admiral's superiors and British diplomacy, let us say here that the Admiral was severely reprimanded for his unwanted intrusion on Cocos Island.
But it was a very minor victory, because Gissler's colony was disintegrating all around him.
It was a very miserable community because you and your immediate friends and neighbours were struggling just to keep alive, and all hopes of getting rich had long since gone. What had looked so promising at the beginning when the colonists arrived began to weaken and fade, and one by one they decided that there was no future for them as farmers on the Cocos plantation.
In 1902, Gissler and Mary were the only ones left on the island. But even then, Gissler was determined not to give up. Gissler had now been searching for over 16 years. And despite all his suffering, he was still convinced he could find the pirates' buried treasure. Out looking for it, he came across a large sign, hand-carved in the bark of a tree.
It said, "The bird is gone." And the question is, what does that mean? Who wrote it?
Was it a cryptic message? Did the bird mean the treasure? Had someone taken it? Had all Gissler's efforts been in vain?
I think the thing that is poignant to me is, do they know that the treasure is gone, or do they think that the treasure is gone? And I wonder how much that played on Gissler's mind all of the time after he'd found them.
Gissler was distraught. Questions began racing through his mind. Did one of the pirates return to the island to retrieve the treasure only to find out one of his shipmates had been there before him? Things were now really getting very desperate for him. No ship had called at the island for nearly a year. He had no ammunition left to shoot game, and he knew he had to make another trip to the mainland for them to survive.
There was no one on the island anymore besides his wife. It must have been a very great relationship. I mean, really very romantic. Every other woman probably would have left and said, well, I have this crazy guy.
Gissler patched up his small handmade boat again. He had no material left to make a sail, so he created one with some sheets off their bed. Gissler told his wife, Mary, he would be away for no longer than 4 to 6 weeks, and set off to buy the supplies. But things didn't go to plan. As soon as he left Cocos, Gissler hit a terrible storm. And ended up in Panama, over 200 miles on from his original destination, the mainland of Costa Rica. Meanwhile, Gissler had left Mary completely abandoned.
So you have his wife living on the island on her own, one woman on her own, on an island in the middle of the Pacific, with only the barest rudiments for capturing her food. She created traps, she caught things. Did she eat rats? Perhaps.
There was no one taking care for her, and she could easily have died on the island.
You can imagine how difficult that must have been for her.
Gissler finally made his way back to Cocos Island 6 months later. But this experience and the constant struggle to exist on the island finally got the better of them. Gissler left the island with Mary in 1908. They settled in New York, where they were supported by relatives. So does that mean that Gissler's efforts to find the pirates' treasure on Cocos Island was all in vain? Gissler had spent 17 years looking for the buried treasure on Cocos Island. But all he had found was a total of 33 gold pieces, minted between 1793 and 1799.
I wonder whether, looking back at the end of his life, did he feel as if those gold coins had somehow lured him into staying on when he should have given it up years before?
In the end, it was just a man who was desperately convinced that there was something on the island, doing whatever he could to find it, but didn't have any new evidence to be able to do it.
It's almost as though each coin that he had found had whispered to him like some mischievous sprite, "There is money here. Go on, August, keep digging."
Gissler died on the 8th of August, 1935. He was 78. In his will, he left half of Cocos Island to friends and relatives. He had estimated the value of his legacy to be around $200,000. But when the beneficiaries approached the Cocos government to claim their inheritance, they were told that because Gissler was only a temporary governor and never owned the island, his will was worthless. But there is another way at looking at Gissler's life. He may not have found what he was looking for, but it's a magnificent tribute to the human spirit that he endured for so long.
Most people that go to the island can only cope with maybe 1 or 2 weeks of digging, because in the end it tires you, it saps you. Even to have the physical and mental fortitude to survive on that island and to dig on that island for a few weeks is phenomenal. To do what Gissler did, which was to never give up, and to spend 17 years looking for the treasure, is a mark of an extraordinary human being.
Once he'd set out on his quest, there was no turning back, as long as there was blood in his veins and breath in his lungs.
Obsessed, maybe, but certainly passionate, certainly resourceful, and he was basically living his dream. Who can fault him for that?
The following words are believed to be the last he ever wrote.
The treasure is on the island, but it will take money and a good deal of effort to unearth it. I have gone through many hardships and dangers, and perhaps shall do so again, but this will not keep me away.